Welcome to this explainer. I'm honestly so excited to have you here today because we're going to look at one of the absolute most brilliant sociological blueprints ever recorded in human history. We are talking about the 14th century scholar Ibn Khaldun and his absolute masterpiece, the Muqaddimah. What he created here isn't just some dry history book, it's an incredibly accurate, timeless formula that tracks the exact chronological life and death of human power structures. So if you want to understand how groups take over the world and exactly how they eventually lose it, you are definitely in the right place.
So, ask yourself, why do all great empires have an expiration date? Seriously, we tend to think of massive dynasties, empires, or even huge modern institutions as these permanent, unmovable fixtures. But Ibn Khaldun approached this totally differently. He viewed human society through a biological lens. He argued that, just like a human being, a dynasty actually has a natural, unavoidable lifespan. It's born, it grows strong, it ages, it becomes senile, and then eventually it dies. But what are the underlying mechanics of that lifespan? Let's find out.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to trace the exact chronological life and death of a dynasty using this roadmap. We'll look at 1. The engine of conquest. 2. The rise to power. 3. The trap of luxury. 4. The generational clock. And finally, 5. The cycle repeats.
Section 1. The engine of conquest.
To build an empire, you don't start in a comfortable palace. You start out in the wilderness, the desert, out on the periphery. Empires are born out of sheer necessity and the struggle to simply survive. The absolute core of Ibn Khaldun's theory is this concept called Asabiyyah. You can think of it as group solidarity, social cohesion, or honestly just the DNA of an empire. In a harsh, unforgiving, nomadic environment, what Ibn Khaldun calls Bedouin, survival is impossible on your own. You need your people. This creates an incredibly tight, unbreakable bond among kin. This Asabiyyah is the raw, fundamental engine of power that allows a tough, highly unified group to conquer much larger, softer societies. But there is a way to supercharge it.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the contrast. When you have Asabiyyah alone, yes, it's strong, but tribal bonds definitely have their limits. They're pretty easily fractured by petty rivalries, jealousies, and internal power struggles over who gets to be in charge. But when you combine that raw tribal Asabiyyah with a dawah, a shared religious calling, it acts like rocket fuel. The religious movement completely wipes out those internal rivalries. It gives the group a unified divine purpose, taking their natural toughness and unstoppably amplifying it.
This brings us to a brilliantly pragmatic observation by Ibn Khaldun. He wrote, "Every religious calling must have a group's solidarity to protect it." He's pointing out that a religious message or a prophecy doesn't just magically succeed in a vacuum. Even prophets need the muscle of Asabiyyah behind them. A religious community bound by faith alone, without that underlying tribal physical solidarity to actually defend it, is just going to be crushed by its enemies. You absolutely need both to rise to power.
And the source material points to incredible historical proof of this dynamic. Ibn Khaldun highlights the Battle of al-Qadisiyah during the early Islamic conquests. To put this into perspective, you had an army of roughly 30,000 Muslims going up against a massive, heavily armed Persian force of about 120,000. So how does the dramatically smaller army win? Because their fierce nomadic Asabiyyah was perfectly unified and amplified by their religious calling. That combination made them an unstoppable force against a massive but decaying empire.
Section 2. The rise to power. Let's move on and see how this builds. So, our tough, unified group has conquered the state. What happens next? Well, at first, the victory is shared. It's tribal glory. The ruler is really just the first among equals. But, human nature kicks in. Step 2. The ruler begins to monopolize authority. He wants the royal glory, the wealth, and the absolute power reserved strictly for his direct lineage. To do this, he actually has to push away his original tribe, the very people whose Asabiyyah put him in power in the first place, because they view themselves as his equals, which directly forces step 3. The ruler now has to rely on hired help to maintain control.
It's a completely fatal but essentially necessary step in the evolution of the dynasty. By distancing himself from his kin to claim that absolute royal authority, the ruler destroys his original base of power. So he now has to dip into the state treasury to hire foreign mercenaries for protection. Ibn Khaldun gives the perfect historical example of this, the Abbasid caliphs. As their original Arab tribal cohesion started fading, they had to start hiring Turkic and Daylamite mercenaries to protect the throne. The state survives for a while, sure, but its internal foundation is actively crumbling.
Section 3. The trap of luxury.
Now we enter the decay phase. This is where the empire starts being destroyed from the inside out. The absolute key concept here is hadara. Hadara is sedentary, urban luxury. Think back to our tough desert conquerors for a second. Now they're living in cities. They're getting used to fine silk clothing, exotic foods, huge palaces, hot baths, the whole shebang. This comfort breeds deep complacency. It creates a massive psychological and social erosion. That gritty toughness and bravery that won them the empire in the first place, it vanishes, because they literally no longer have to fight for their survival.
So, the crucial point is that this comfort is quite literally a slow poison. Think about the basic economics of luxury. Building huge palaces and paying a massive mercenary army costs an absolute fortune. So what does the state do? It raises taxes. Higher taxes completely alienate the subjects and crush the economy. Meanwhile, the original ruling class has entirely lost the willingness and, frankly, the physical ability to fight. They've become 100% dependent on the state for their protection and their lavish lifestyles. At this point, the downfall is practically guaranteed.
Section 4. The generational clock. And this decay, it happens on a very predictable schedule. 120, that is the magic number. Ibn Khaldun argues that 120 years is the natural, unavoidable biological lifespan of a dynasty, and he mathematically breaks this 120-year cycle down into 3 distinct generations of roughly 40 years each.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact timeline of a collapse. Let's walk through it. Generation 1, from year 0 to 40, are the tough founders. They remember the harsh desert, they retain their bravery and their strong Asabiyyah. Then comes Generation 2, from year 40 to 80. They're the ones transitioning into luxury. They only really know the palace, not the desert. That social cohesion is actively weakening. And finally, Generation 3, from year 80 to 120, total decay. They are completely consumed by luxury, entirely reliant on hired mercenaries, and utterly defenseless. We can see the mathematical certainty of the decline right here. You go from the harsh, totally self-reliant nomads of Generation 1 who share extremely strong cohesion, down to the second generation who begin trading in their toughness for palaces and bodyguards, and finally Generation 3. Living in absolute luxury, their social cohesion is completely, irreversibly lost, and they are entirely defenseless. It's literally a tragedy of success. They succeeded so much that they engineered their own destruction.
Section 5. The cycle repeats.
As the saying goes, nature abhors a vacuum. When an empire becomes defenseless, it's basically just waiting to be devoured. The generational clock simply resets. A new, hungry group with fresh, fierce Asabiyyah emerges from the wilderness, looking at those soft city dwellers like prey. And the source material gives us countless historical examples of this. The Zenata are conquered by the tougher Almoravids. Then the Almoravids get soft and are replaced by the tougher Almohads. The Umayyads fall to the Abbasids. It is a constant, churning wheel of history, where the tough conquer the soft until the tough become soft themselves. Ibn Khaldun viewed this cycle as an impartial, undeniable reality of human civilization. In his work, he actually cites this passage from the Quran. God brings a new creation, and that is not difficult for God. He viewed the death and replacement of dynasties not as random political accidents or bad luck, but as an inevitable, divine law of nature. Just as a plant withers and dies to make way for new growth, so too must an empire eventually die so that a vigorous new one can take its place. Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. Ibn Khaldun wrote all of this way back in the 14th century, but human nature really hasn't changed, has it? Look at the structures around us today, our huge corporations, our governments, our institutions. Ask yourself, where do they sit on Ibn Khaldun's generational clock right now? Are the people leading them the tough, unified founders? Are they the maintainers just relying on outside help to keep things running? Or have they fallen completely into the trap of luxury, resting in total decay, just waiting for a new force to emerge from the periphery? It's definitely something fascinating to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.